Well, thank you for coming to the movies. I'm sorry we didn't have drinks and popcorn, but I am Jennifer Lahl, and I wrote and directed and produced this film with Kallie Fell, and we're happy to be here to share it. And it was really interesting. Kallie's going to talk a little bit about the genesis of this particular film. But it was interesting as women filmmakers making a film for men, because we knew that if men made the film for men, they would be mansplaining. So we wanted to give the men 100% permission to talk about their feelings and their perspectives. So anyway, my first question will be to Kallie, just to sort of talk about how we as filmmakers came into this space that we were never intended to be dragged into.
Nor did we want to. I don't think anyone wants voluntarily to come into this space, but Jennifer started an organization called the Center for Bioethics and Culture that I now am the executive director for. And if you know anything about that organization, we're a nonprofit that educates on the sphere of bioethics, which is quite broad. But we especially like to hold medicine. We're also both nurses. We like to hold medicine accountable to the rich tradition that we've talked about today a little bit, the Hippocratic Oath, do no harm. And so when we found out that children were being harmed, it bothered us. And then also as an organization for the last 20 years, we've done a lot of work in assisted reproduction or third-party reproduction, things like IVF, fertility type things. And we found out that these children, before being put on puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones and irreversible surgeries and the onslaught of medical treatment, they were being offered fertility preservation, which is also just experimental in nature, let alone in children. And then we just thought, okay, this is ridiculous. This is preposterous. Like, we have to step into this space. So that was right around COVID, and then that was in 2021. So we created our first film actually in this space. Called Transmission, What's the Rush to Reassign Gender? And all the films I'm talking about today and all the films beyond that are free on our YouTube channel, CBC-Network. But Transmission, What's the Rush to Reassign Gender? We just wanted to enter the space. We wanted to see, and parents especially, they had nowhere to go, nowhere to turn to. This was early in this kind of rampant thing. So we interviewed parents, professionals, just to get an idea, like what is going on? Why are we doing this to children? And we found out a couple of things. First, people really related with parents. People really felt for them, right? And then second, the detransitioners. We only had 2 in that film, if I recall, and we were starting to hear from them and starting to hear from their voices. And right before our film was released, 60 Minutes aired their special, and they got a lot of backlash for having those voices of detransitioners. So we made a second film. And that one we focused on 3 stories, and this was very women-focused. It was an all-women cast, and it was focused on 3 women who had been bought the lie that they were born in the wrong body and decided to medically transition. You can't do that, as Richie says in the film. And they did that. And we thought we were done, to be honest. I think we were like, okay, we've done our films, this is good. And then Dottie, thank goodness for her, she approached Jennifer and really was responsible for a lot of the funds for getting that film off the ground. And so the parents helped us out there. And I do want to go back really quick to say just kind of how things are going. This film now has over 160,000 views alone on YouTube, and then it's separate clips over 500,000. But our first film was actually, we were kind of in that wake of censorship or being canceled, and that film we couldn't monetize on YouTube. Thankfully, it was not kicked off YouTube, but they kept it from any type of monetization. We entered in film festivals. They wouldn't let us enter. They blocked us from entering. We tried to show it at theaters once they found out what the film was about. Oh no, you can't show it. So we've kind of come a long way, but that's kind of the genesis of our start, and then now here and you've got to see the latest film. We're really thankful for those who helped us create it.
Yeah, and I would just add that that's sort of a trajectory of how I see the debate changing in the right direction in that the first film we couldn't even monetize, and now this film has been actually officially selected in 5 different film festivals in the United States, and one being the California Independent Film Festival. So it's, you know, it's not just some, you know, red state film festival. Anyway, so I'm going to ask my next question to you, Andrew, because you're the journalist, the free speech guy. As we all have been in this space for quite a few years now, are you optimistic? Are we winning the free speech war? Are we winning the sanity wars?
I have good days and bad days on that, but I think one of the really positive things is to produce work as you have done, that kind of film, getting that information out there. One of the big problems that we have, I feel, and I've interviewed a number of detransitioners, I've spoken to a lot of detransitioners, the recurring thing that keeps coming back is that it's very difficult for those stories to be told. Firstly, because the media have been complicit in keeping them stifled, but secondarily because there are hordes of activists who will punish them brutally for daring to speak out. To the extent that I know that a lot of detransitioners won't take that risk, and I don't blame them, because the ferocity of the response is absolutely abhorrent. And I think had the media done a better job in informing people of these kinds of stories that you're showing in the film, we wouldn't be in this position to begin with. But we're not even having the conversation. You know, I mean, there were so many interesting points raised in that film that we should be discussing openly. I mean, you mentioned about young people, but there's also people like Richie Herron, who was 26 when he began. And you could say, well, you know, this is an adult who makes his own decisions, and that's fair enough. But what about the ethics of the doctor? Why aren't we having a conversation? I mean, if I go to a doctor and say, I need to have a part of my body removed in order to be happy, well, there has to be a conversation about that, hasn't there? There has to be, is that ethical for the doctor to undertake that? And we've seen the disastrous repercussions. But why hasn't that conversation even been happening? And I do blame the media. I blame the profession I'm in, because it just hasn't been there. Yeah. So am I optimistic? I don't know, because I can tell you most media outlets still will not report on this. Most media outlets haven't reported on the WPATH files. They haven't reported on detransitioners. For a lot of people, that isn't even a thing. And I think the media has to bear a lot of responsibility.
Would you say that the CAST report, you both can answer this, has been well received? I mean, is it getting mainstream chatter, or is it being debunked?
No, you see, well, the debunking is kind of a sign of its success, because this summer there were 2 things that I felt were, or not summer, actually it was just the last few months, 2 things that were met with an incredible amount of smoke by trans activists. One was the CAST report, where you saw the same talking points released again and again, or put forward again and again. Like, for instance, this idea that they'd thrown out a lot of valuable research, when in fact they'd thrown out research by the lunatics at WPATH, you know, so it wasn't, but that gets repeated so often that it becomes a kind of handy way that people who don't think about this issue can dismiss it. And the second thing was Iman Khalif, which was such a horror story. Like, the millions of people watched women being beaten up in a boxing ring night after night. And again, the smoke that was blown was to do with DSDs. The one that Iman was supposed to have is one that can only happen to men, which no one noticed. When he won, he jumped on top of his trainer's shoulders, which I don't think I've ever seen a woman from Algeria do. And because these were both things that, if people thought about it and grasped it properly, it would make them furiously angry. The smoke was just billowing out, you know? So yeah, it's kind of a good thing and a bad thing, because like they've been the most, one might say, high-peaking events recently, and they both so terrified trans activists that there was a great kind of coordination in trying to muddy the issue. So, as you say, it's 1 step forward and 2 steps back. So everything that happens like that will be met by a kind of equal and opposing force from trans activists, but their voices are getting weaker. They are looking more and more ridiculous. I'm sure we've all seen the rapist who was arrested and he has a full beard, and the BBC had the headline, woman arrested or whatever it was. And I think it just can't really go on at the level it is for too much longer. I don't think it's what's the word? Possible for it to continue the way it's been going for the last 5 years. And like Andrew, I hold the doctors obviously are very responsible for what's been happening, but the press, the media, they really have to be held to account as well.
Well, and my position, and I think Kallie's is as well, we don't think doctors should be doing this to anybody.
No.
It's not an age issue.
Well, can I comment on that?
You, of course, can.
There's an interesting story. Many of you know Malcolm Clark, who works for the LGB Alliance, but in his old life, he used to be a producer of science programs. He produced Horizon, which many my age will have fond memories of. But when my writing partner, I used to be a comedy writer, when my writing partner and I were writing in around 1992, 93, we saw a Horizon program that was actually made by Malcolm, and it was about two men who, I think it was two men, but they both believed that they had limbs they wanted to take off. A leg in one case, I think, and an arm in the other. And the doctors did it. It was the first time they did it. It was the first time they went through with a procedure to cure a mental problem by removing a body part. And the thing that Arthur and I, being young comedy writers, found hilarious was one of the guys who got his leg taken off was interviewed right afterwards, after like the rest of the program, saying, "Yep, no, I don't like it. I want it gone. I'll only be happy without it." And then they interviewed him afterwards, and he said, "That was a terrible mistake," you know. And the only place where cutting off a body part to solve a mental problem has survived is in pediatric medicine, you know. Is in like, I just think it's extraordinary that something that was discontinued after this Horizon program survives in pediatric medicine.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to just toot my horn real quick, because Stella actually commissioned me to write this document that's available now at the conference this week on the medical ethics and the physician's duty in modern medicine. And we actually, I refer to that, you know, limb removal, you know, part of the body dysmorphia. And there's no bottom to that. And, you know, when the physician's reduced to a technician versus seeing himself in some kind of, you know, fiduciary, ethical, moral, covenantal duty in this relationship between doctor and patient, that there really is no duty. So I have to ask you both, Kallie and I live in California. This is when we break out our, what was us? You know, we have Gavin Newsom. We have Scott Wiener. You know, we have Nancy Pelosi. Kamala Harris used to be one of our senators, district attorney. We feel sorry for ourselves, and we look across the pond and go, you guys are so lucky. You've closed Tavistock. You've stopped blocking puberty. You know, you're winning lawsuits. You're winning, you know, whether it be detransition lawsuits or whether it be, you know, the people that have been canceled and fired and lost their jobs lawsuits. Do you feel lucky?
I wonder whether it's because, I mean, we're dealing with ideological capture here, whether that be the media or the medical establishment. But I think for whatever reason in the UK, it hasn't reached the high courts. The very top of the judiciary seem to be pretty sensible at the moment. I mean, God knows what you do when they become captured as well. And also you have certain political figures such as Rosie Duffield, such as now Wes Streeting, who has come around to this point of view, and he's come around to this point of view by simply reading about it and informing himself about it. One of the major problems that I think possibly, I mean, I shouldn't speak too much of America because I'm not sure, but my perception is that politicians are nervous about even looking into it in case they are disabused of the notions they currently hold. So I suppose it is about the reason why the UK, why they call us Turf Island, why there is a degree of success, is that there are very tenacious individuals who are forcing the conversation to happen against incredible odds. I mean, if you consider the BBC, I mean, let's take the WPATH files as a very good example. That should be the end of gender-affirming care. Because what it revealed, with the work of Mia Hughes and Michael Schellenberger and everyone else, and I know Genspect are involved as well, I think what it revealed very clearly is that a lot of the chief antagonists within this movement are fully aware that many of the people who are undergoing this kind of surgery cannot possibly give informed consent, whether that be because they are too young or because they have mental health issues. There are stories in the WPATH files of people who are homeless, who are on substance abuse, who don't understand. I mean, there's a recording of a doctor saying, you know, these kids don't even have a biology high school diploma, and we're trying to explain to them this stuff. So the big scandal of that is that the people perpetrating the acts are fully aware of the unethical aspect to the acts that they are perpetrating. That should have been the end of the conversation. It hasn't been, because the media in America haven't really covered it. They haven't in the UK either. I wrote to the BBC on 5 or 6 occasions to ask why. They ignored most of... I just kept doing it. Like in the Shawshank Redemption, you know, he keeps writing the letters, and eventually they have to get back to you. And they sort of say, well, you know, we don't cover everything that happens in the world. You would have thought that the state broadcaster would cover the biggest medical scandal of the century, but whatever. And, you know, of course, let's not forget the BBC has an identity group locked within it that it seems, I can't be sure, but appears to have a certain degree of clout within the organisation. I mean, they have a gender identity correspondent. That already reveals their ideological bias. It's like having a transubstantiation correspondent. So that's what we're fighting against, is that deep ideological bias which is instantiated within these major institutions. But I think there's just something about the UK is that the activists here, the campaigners here, just don't give up. They keep fighting back, and thank God.
Yeah. So I don't want to out Kallie, because she still is working in clinical nursing in the great city of San Francisco. But what have you seen? You know, she's a labor and delivery nurse, so she has to deliver, you know, babies that men are having. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. I don't know. You have to work with, you know, trans-identifying, you know, members of the healthcare team. Yeah. You know, you're told to identify your, you know, you enter your patient's room in the hospital in California, so you're supposed to say, my name is Jennifer, I'm going to be your nurse tonight, and my pronouns are, whatever my pronouns are. I mean, it's, what are your experiences trying to navigate that?
Yeah.
Other than you use different names.
I do. I do use different names. Thankfully, no more masks. But no, it's incredibly difficult because, as we talked about a little bit today, just the unethical. Someone brought it up about, you know, we're going to keep doing this procedure for a small amount of people, even though there might be those that are harmed. And we're seeing that same kind of idea in medicine. In a labor and delivery, I'm a perinatal nurse. I take care of women. I have a reproductive physiology degree, know what a woman is, and the field of nursing that I am is to take care of women, and yet we are erasing women in the field. We have to refer, you know, there's classes and courses on what to say. It's chest feeding, not breastfeeding. It's persons with cervix, it's a parent, it's the pregnant person, the pregnant individual. We are wiping out women from really what you would argue is like the only women's space possible. And then not only that, but Jennifer and I wrote an article for Colin Wright's publication just about the danger, plug out for him, the dangers of we know what's dangerous for the most part for babies. You know, we tell women what they can and should eat or drink while they're pregnant, and testosterone is not one of those things that's healthy for a baby. I don't feel like that's new news, but we did have to write an article about that and how, I think Helen Joyce actually referred to that article today in her talk, and just the fact that we're having to stand up and say, but this ideology is not for women, it is not for babies, and it is incredibly harmful to the maternal-fetal bond that we promote in so many other ways, such as being baby-friendly breastfeeding, those types of initiatives that you find in a hospital. It's interesting, just to share one of my stories, is we have these pamphlets, and how this is hurting women is that we have these pamphlets that every mother gets, whether she be a new mother or have had several children, and they're congratulations mom pamphlets, and it talks about breastfeeding. It's got lots of resources, and I was told don't hand those out because they're not politically correct yet. So we're keeping resources from women just because they say women in the handout, and so it's crazy what we're up against in the hospital.
Yeah. So Graham, as a filmmaker, when I'm making a movie, oftentimes I know how the movie is going to end, just based on interviews and things people say. And we end the movie with something that you say. And I'll tell you these are you have to make a donation to Genspect to hear this, but no. We even had like a fight with our editor because he didn't want you to say dumb and stupid or whatever you said. And we thought, no, it's great, it's brilliant. He's like, well, they might think bad of Graham. I'm like, you'll be fine. He said it. But you end with turning the ship around.
Yeah, yeah.
Are we going to turn it around still? Are you holding to your prediction?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think we're in an interesting stage at the moment. I know for a fact there are a lot of people in the BBC who are very angry, in BBC Factual, who are very angry. But I think that what we have at the moment is a kind of a strange stage where these people are going to have to admit that they got it very, very wrong. I know Helen Joyce famously talked about the parents of trans kids, not the ones who fought their kids, but the ones who kind of, in a version of Munchausen's, encouraged it, and just like Susie Green, who decided when her kid was 4, I think, like those guilty parents, there's going to be a lot of guilty people at the BBC, a lot of guilty people in politics, who are going to have to admit not only that they cast a lot of innocent people as bigots, but also that they set a lot of children down this road. I really think it should be a resigning matter for the head of the BBC.
I've read your book,
yes.
And you've signed it. Thank you. It's really a good book. It's laugh out loud funny. But my question to you also is, you say in the film, it really cost you a lot, personally. Yeah. And like sitting here now and looking back, would you do it again? Would you do it differently?
Oh God, no. I've often thought about that, but it kind of revealed a few things about my friends that I didn't know. And I'm sort of glad I found out now, and not when Nazi stormtroopers were knocking on the door and asking where I was. Because I now know that I was surrounded by people who would say he's in the attic. Yeah. And it's just kind of, so I feel that I've lost a large group of friends who all decided at the same time, whether through cowardice or ideology, to join in with this absurd, horrific movement that has caused so much damage. I mean, I saw someone in the audience crying after your film, and I'm sure, and I know yesterday when someone asked, are there any parents here whose children are going through it, there was like dozens of hands went up. I mean, the amount of pain they've caused, and I just don't think it's just down to a mendacious medical capture or lack of ethics. It's kind of it goes through so many different systems, the press, the broadcast TV, children's programming. There's so many guilty parties that it is going to take a while for them to be able to look at what they've done and own up to it. And to them, I really think they should think of it like a plaster. They've got to rip it off. They've got to say, yeah, we were wrong and it was terrible, and they've, if they do that, I think more will follow, But as long as we're in this weird midpoint, I think we'll still be, speaking to ourselves for a while, But I do think it will break out sooner or later. It's just...
Yeah, and I think for us in California, I'm no big fan of Gavin Newsom. I hope you're going to watch this. I'll be sure to send the link to this discussion to you, Gavin. But, a few years ago, he signed a reparations bill, in millions and millions of dollars to people that were involuntarily sterilized in that dark moment of our time when we thought it was a good idea to sterilize people. So I often say that, now that we've become a sanctuary state, we'll have to soon, become a reparations state to pay reparations for people that were mutilated. You did a great job of talking about what boys need, what they think is funny. They need to be able to be boys and laugh at things and sexy things, whatever. I thought it was just so spot on. But, I didn't have the luxury of interviewing you, Andrew, for the film. So do you think that this is a difficult time to be a boy? And do you point to certain...
Yeah, I mean, that's very interesting. That was raised repeatedly in the film about this notion of toxic masculinity, the idea of pathologizing boyhood. Christina Hoff Sommers has written extensively about this. She's got a book called The War Against Boys, where effectively she talks about how certain patterns of behavior amongst male children, such as rough and tumble play, which is more predominant among boys, is seen as a problem to be fixed. In other words, boys aren't behaving like girls. At the same time, you don't want to ever kind of essentialize the idea that boys should behave in some way and girls should behave in another way. But there is clear evidence of a preponderance of a certain kind of behavior amongst male children and amongst female children. So I think that's a really interesting thing. We've seen how that kind of discourse, the idea of toxic masculinity, similar to the discourse of white privilege, has got real-world effects on kids because it muddies the waters. We've seen in certain... it's actually had... direct impact. For instance, if you go on about white privilege all the time, it means that white kids aren't supported when they do face deprivation. So it can have a direct effect. And similarly, if we keep talking about how to be male is a form of toxicity, I think that does create that kind of problem. Where I'm not sure of the extent to which that is the key driver behind so many boys seeking to transition. Maybe, I mean, that's an interesting debate about the notion of shame. But one of the other things that I think might be a really key driver, which I think is something that might help get a lot of the people who are traditionally left-wing on board, is the fact that this seems to disproportionately affect so many gay boys. We know from Hannah Barnes's research that between 80 and 90% of adolescents referred to the Tavistock are same-sex attracted. So there's that. I've spoken to a number of detransitioners. There was one I spoke to in America who was very candid about has no genitals anymore, and I was speaking to him, and it just struck me, this is just a camp man. This is just an effeminate gay man. And I think what we've got to remember is, I mean, when I was a child, homophobia was rife. There was no such thing as a boy being out at school. It just wasn't a possibility. And that kind of societal prejudice doesn't just disappear. It finds a new outlet. And I think that's what's happened now. We have effectively boys, men, being shamed for being gay. I mean, they're even shamed by organizations such as Grindr. Grindr, which is a gay hookup app, will actually say, it says on its website, you can filter out for all sorts of preferences. You can't filter out women who identify as men. But this is an app for male homosexuals. You would have thought filtering out women is actually quite a sensible thing to do.
Yeah.
But actually they shame people for being gay. Similarly with lesbian websites now, they shame the women who complain because there are blokes on their app. So I think what we're seeing here in a big level, and this might be a way to, because the activists have done such a good job of saying this is about right versus left. And it actually isn't. If we care about gay rights, this is something we really need to address. Why is it that the NHS has something in common with the mullahs of Tehran who would rather change you cosmetically into the opposite sex in order to heterosexualize you? Why are we not having that discussion? Because that's insane. And that's certainly not a progressive stance.
Yeah.
Can I just point out, because some people may not know this, but one of the results of what Andrew is describing, one of the results of what Andrew is describing on Grindr is that a lot of heterosexual men are joining the app so that they can predate on the women who think they're men. Yeah, it's a real problem. And they basically, I saw one conversation on a forum with one guy saying they're so desperate for it, they're so desperate to be accepted by gay men, they're so easy, and most of them, they said, you can catch before the testosterone takes effect. So that's what's happening in these
Which is horrible for those girls, of course, is where they've been told a lie. They've been told that if they have surgery, if they identify as male, gay men will find them attractive.
Yeah.
They really don't. And it's easy to spot straight away. I mean, I had a message from a friend in a sex club in Europe saying, it's full of women who've had their breasts removed, and no one is attracted to them. And these girls don't know why, because they were told that it would happen.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole thing is insane. I'm not surprised that predatory straight men are taking advantage of this.
But can I say also that in terms of the straight men who are transitioning, like one of the reasons why I was happy to do this film is because I think that this movement targets intelligent, sensitive kids, of which I used to be one, I think, you know, and so the very kids who are not toxic, who are not predatory in any way, they are the ones who are transitioning. So what this is, it seems to me, is a conformist movement destroying the nonconformists. You know, so it's dangerous. I do think that the straight side of things should be talked about more, because I've spoken to a lot of detransitioners who say they did it because they just thought men were evil, you know, and they thought they wanted to get the poison out of them.
Yeah. Can I speak to one thing?
Yeah.
So right before we created this film, Jennifer and I actually wrote a book called The Detransition Diaries, and a comment that you made reminded me of when I was researching for this book about why this is happening in young women and then young men. One teacher, and I can't remember his name, it's in our book, but he talked about too how there's this idea that being of the majority is also problematic. So not only is it a problem to be white male or just white privilege, but these children are trying to find a way out of that. So they become the minority through adopting this ideology because, true, they might be excluded or a sensitive kid or a strange kid without friends, so then they're celebrated by their peers through this, and then they also become a minority as well. So I just thought that was an interesting part of this conversation.
Like they want to be seen as the oppressed.
Right, correct.
You know?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Especially, and that's another reason why a lot of these kids come from middle class backgrounds.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And that was Helena in the Detransition Diaries. That was part of her story. You know, her mother is a physician. She was from an educated, family, an upper, income family, and she found that if she all of a sudden used pronouns, she got a little more social credit, and then she became non-binary. She got a little bit more, and so she was encouraged, sort of motivated to do that. Well, our time is up by that big clock over there. It says 000. So thank you so much. I know it's been a long day, and Stella wants you back here bright and early tomorrow morning. So thanks for joining us, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.